Hello and welcome to another KOFISI Connect podcast. This time we're discussing restitution. The dictionary says that's the restoration of something lost or stolen to its proper owner. But in the context of this discussion, it's something much more specific and I believe much more significant. So perhaps it's time to introduce my guest, Saitabao Kaiyare, and ask what restitution means to him.
Restitution. Yes, restitution is not only giving back what belongs to people, but also giving the value and addressing the issues of the reason why some of the things were taken. So when it comes to restitution, it's a culmination of words with repatriation and reparations as well. So it's taking something that belonged to a group of people or person, and also making sure that the value and the knowledge is appreciated and the history of it is also shared and talked about.
Because of course you very specifically are talking about African artifacts, and you've made a brilliant film called If Objects Could Speak, which I think is also a brilliant title. And I thoroughly enjoyed watching this. In fact, restitution for you has now become a kind of lifelong journey, hasn't it, Saitabao? Specifically about African artifacts being repatriated to their hometown. So you've made a film about it. Tell me a little bit about your film.
So our film is titled If Objects Could Speak, where I co-directed with a German director called Helena Schilling. In our film, we had conversations about colonialism and about all these African artifacts in European museums. So we decided to take on a journey. We were very naive. We wanted to actually take a physical object and bring it back to Kenya. As we were just filmmakers, we didn't know the magnitude or the jurisdiction, the bureaucracy that involves in just taking one object from Kenya in a German museum back to Kenya. So we were not able to do so. So we were able to do a 3D scan of an object, an artifact. We used augmented reality, and we brought the scan back to Kenya, where we traveled both in the urban cities in Kenya and in the rural setting, asking people questions if they know what this object is and what it signified, because this object, according to the museum data, entered in 1903, and that's the only information. So it had only two informations: when it entered the museum and who brought it to the museum, and the assumed name of the object. So through our journey, we were able to discover what this object was by talking to different people, different communities, and especially the elderly.
The film itself, it tells a real story about the specific object that you're talking about. It also feels like a kind of process of discovery for you as well. It was a very personal journey, not only about the object, but for you. So tell me what you learned in the process.
Yeah, of course, definitely. It was also a very personal journey for me, because I think I always had identity issues. You feel somewhat African, not African enough, and not knowing African history. When I got to visit the different museums in Europe, I got to see all this magnitude of artifacts, and some of these objects or artifacts have a history, they have ideologies, they have philosophical elements to it on how they were used and what it meant to the people. So for me personally, it was also a journey of rediscovering myself and who I am, because if you look at even in our education system, we rarely talk about our history. History begins very shortly before colonial time, and during colonial time, that's the history. But there's so much history that's untold and has been buried, and part of the film was also rediscovering that.
Taken, in essence, is kind of what you're saying. I mean, these artifacts are crucial. I mean, we were talking about this earlier in terms of if any of these artifacts were sort of taken from, I don't know, a Roman Catholic church in Italy, or any of the churches in many of the European countries, objects of value and kind of deep cultural significance, there would be uproar. And the same just doesn't seem to be happening. What's extraordinary, and you start off the film showing, is the extent and the amount of things that have been taken. Most of them are not even on show, which I think is a huge shame. Describe how you had to go to Europe to kind of discover your African culture.
Yeah, how ironic.
So tell me why you decided to make a film about it.
When we were in the process of making a film, this was part of an exchange program at the film school where I was studying. So they gave us the opportunity to tackle any subjects. But at the end goal, we're supposed to make a film where we shoot both in Kenya and in Germany. So my co-director and I got into this cosmos of ideas on how to connect our history. And then, of course, the debate on restitution and repatriation came to light, and also from the personal point of view, where I got to see a lot of African artifacts in Europe, in the European museums. So that's how we culminated and decided to sort of take on this film, take on this journey, and address this specific issue. And for us, we were very specific because this debate is always from a very expert level. You find the expert people talking about this conversation, and for us, it was very important to involve the ordinary people, the people whose culture has been uprooted, not just any academic or researcher or expert, but also give those people, ordinary citizens, ordinary people, a voice and to get their opinions. That's how we decided to go about the film.
I think we should take a quick listen to a clip of the film right now.
What is this?
I have no idea. That you can find such things in Germany, and we've not seen them ourselves here in Kenya.
From the museum data, this is from the Kikuyu.
Oh.
Anyone of the children Kikuyu?
Yeah. I don't know anything about it. Okay. Like I can ask my grandparents maybe. Wow.
And in 1903, were Kikuyus in Germany? How did it get there?
1903.
1903.
Nice. Traditions.
Kama weekend. Oh, hii namba gani? Sasa sijui imechorwa aje.
I think it's an object on an authority.
Could be a Wango Makere kind of thing. Because Kikuyus were ruled by, according to history, by women. Sindio.
True, but the difference all Sasa nyinyi mligundua hii kitu aje watu wangu? Nyinyi mligundua aje hii kitu?
So hiyo tulipata kwa museum huko. Wameifungia mahali.
Mkata tu lap mkafika huko mkaona tu hii kitu hivi. Ama nyinyi mlikuwa mnajua huko tunaenda kupata hii kitu?
Tulikuwa tunaenda kutafuta kitu tukapata hizi.
Mkapata tu hizi pekee hapo ndani.
And also like the brightest people of that time, probably they harmed them to take this stuff away that they put in basements. And then if they stuff in the basements, what else is there?
Yeah.
And
in which other museums?
Yeah, and in which other museums around the world, but it's ours. Then can we have a conversation after it's here? Yeah.
Because the museum doesn't have any information on it. So maybe they weren't even the ones who actually transported it from here to there. Maybe they got it from somebody.
That's a terrible conversation because when you think about it, it's not that like a bong was lying on the street and then there's this nice white person saying, let me keep this bong for you until you have a house. The fuck? Return it.
It's ours.
I can keep it in my SQ until we figure it out. So that is not their discussion.
Do you know what? Harmful to even just assume that as Africans we have to be taught. We have to be taught how to take care. We have museums. And we have museums with old artifacts in them also, and they're fine.
There are many questions to
ask.
Fine. It's a big deal. Take your clothes, keep them in my house.
The people in Nairobi, especially the young, had strong emotions towards this complex situation than we had expected. But we were still clueless what this object was used for. We wanted to get more insights.
It was not possible to film in the Nairobi National Museum.
Thank you guys.
But we still wanted to talk to some local experts in this debate. We met the lawyers Andrew and Immaculate, who shared their perspectives with us.
This is not a matter of political power. This is not a matter of ego. It's not a matter of nationalism, sovereignty, territory. This is a matter of a people's culture. And a people's culture is so important to these people's livelihood, to their sense of being. It's a matter of understanding that culture is a very important thing when it comes to a people, because at the end of the day, we identify ourselves by where we come from. I'd like the debate to move from an issue of nationalism and political power to one of the importance of culture to our people.
I'm happy that you have had these items, you have undertaken research with these items, you have enjoyed the fruits of these items, you've built a cultural empire with these items, and I have to visit here, I have to get permits, I have to get visas to see them. It's the right time to allow me to go to a museum, walk into a museum within my country or within my locality or within Africa, or a place where I can easily access and see these items.
So there you were. That was just a few, I think it was Nairobi that you were filming in there. So a couple of few Nairobians talking about how important it would be to bring these artifacts back to Kenya. There doesn't really seem to be an argument against them being returned, in my view, but there are some. So those were a couple of opinions from people on the streets of Nairobi, who say that they think that they would really benefit from having the artifacts returned. What's the argument against them coming home?
I started off as a filmmaker just working on this film about restitution, and I've been able to be in different spaces and conversations with museum institutions, with government officials. So the problem is, first of all, we have to admit that the taking of this artifact was more of a power dynamic and a power shift. And when we talk about restitution, because legally they say some of these artifacts are owned by the state, so bringing them back is an issue, and there's always excuses such as, where will we take them? If the museum says, if we give back these objects, where will they go? Where will they be kept? And this is some of the arguments where people are always evasive and not talking about the real conversation, because we have communities, not just in Kenya but across Africa, who are demanding specifically for the specific artifact to return, but it's always bureaucratic, and it's now considered if an object is shipped in, there has to be tax, there has to be policy in place, policy framework. So it's just absurd, and we've been talking about this conversation. People have been championing and talking it, but which is very sad, especially from museum institutions. They are a bit reluctant when it comes to doing what they should be doing in terms of restitution.
What do you think needs to be changed? I mean, how can you help your campaign? Where's the sort of, who needs to be on your side? Who needs to be shouting more?
Definitely, there are various people, various organizations who are working, individuals, individual artists, collectives, who are really championing the restitution of these artifacts. However, also for us, we would also, request African governments to also talk about it, speak about it, because this is a whole bureaucratic process, because the state, for example, if the German state owns this object, it belongs to the government, and we know it was looted. So we need also African governments to have policies on how to address. And yes, of course, there have been instances where some objects have been returned, but it's not enough, because time is of the essence, and the more we delay this process, we get to lose the knowledge system, because the most important thing even for this artifacts is the knowledge systems. Because for instance, in our film, we take a very regular artifact and you wouldn't know what it meant, and we really had to travel in the rural areas, talk in the villages, to talk to very elderly people between 90 to 100 who have that knowledge. So it means the unknown artifacts, that knowledge will fade away, because that generation will, pass on. But the knowledge, they will pass on with the knowledge. So for young people, it's also important for them to also vocalize the importance of getting these objects back.
Because of course nothing was written down. There's no photographs. There was no kind of book, books. And do you, when you were in Europe and you were looking at the artifacts, are things correctly labelled? I mean, were there any mistakes? I suppose a lot of assumptions were made over what these objects were or what they meant.
Yeah, definitely. There are quite a number of objects that were mislabeled, and especially even during our research process and talking to the communities, I was able to take some photographs of other objects and artifacts, and the people say this is not what was used for. For example, I'll give you an example of a very famous shield. It's called the Ndome. It belongs to the Kikuyu. Just because it's a shield, it was labeled as something for fighting. However, the shield was ceremonial. because it's a shield and it's the warlike perception. So many objects have been misplaced because you have to understand also during the colonial period when the colonial masters were taking these artifacts, they were taking with a colonial perspective. They really didn't want to understand what it meant, because some of these artifacts, they're not just for beauty or for artistry, they are of spiritual importance, they're of cultural importance, and they're of national importance, and they are used in different rituals. So there's that gap in terms of the knowledge system. So we can't say for sure that all the artifacts that are labeled in museum institutions are accurate.
You were telling me earlier that there was specific legislation by the colonialists who advocated the looting of the artifacts. Tell me a little bit about that, because I think that's quite interesting too.
Yeah, so during the reign of the British government, when Kenya was a colony, in 1920, the governor put a legislation called the 1920s Witchcraft Act. Any person found, because some of these artifacts were of spiritual importance, practicing cultural traditions, was jailed. And some of these artifacts were confiscated by the government. Some were shipped to abroad and some were destroyed. Because of that piece of legislation, the whole cultural aspect of different communities was lost. It's not just 1920, it goes way back in the 1800, 1900, where sort of explorers used to collect, and of course we always say there were some artifacts that were given as gifts, and we always have to know the red line. There's a clear distinction, because there's some artifacts which no way can be given as a gift to a person, because this artifact has importance to the community, especially if it's spiritual or if it's cultural or it has national importance. So there's the whole dynamic of how do we differentiate the gifts and the ones that were looted, and it's very simple. Look at what the artifact meant to the people and what it was used for.
Amazing. Is there anything, apart from the government's lobbying, is there anything more that could be, talking about it, I know you were saying it's a very helpful way of getting the message out there. Your film as well needs to be distributed further.
Yes, exactly. We've had the opportunity to screen in various festivals, not just here locally, but also different countries, both in Africa and also in Europe. But we're also looking for a way to push it forward in terms of having the film have a home in terms of video on demand platform or a main broadcaster, just so that we're able to share what we were able to film and what about the conversation and the topic and the theme per se. So we're still pushing in terms of distribution. So we're looking forward to having conversations with different people, and we really like to advocate this conversation should go on, which it's still a lot of people are talking about. I'll give you an instance. Here in Kenya, we have something called the International Inventories Program. So it was a group of artists, people from the National Museums of Kenya, collective in Europe, where they're creating a database about all the artifacts that are in Europe. So in this database, they've been able to identify 30,000 objects from Kenya, from different museums, and that's just a fraction because some institutions have refused to collaborate. So it's just about echoing about this topic and conversation to different people. Also, the media needs to highlight. I know it's very sensitive and it's very murky. No one wants to get, because it might bring a lot of diplomatic rows. So it's a conversation where people need to be involved in, and especially involving people and the communities and the people themselves, and giving them a voice to talk.
Understanding the importance of these artifacts, I think it's hugely significant. I think the Benin bronzes, a few of them have gone back. Some of them are being still held, but it does show that I think that there's slightly more appreciation of what has happened, and people are start to recognise that more needs to be done. So if you haven't seen it, it's a film called If Objects Could Speak. How would people be able to access it?
We have social media pages, and we have a website, ifobjectscouldSpeak.com. Very soon people can follow our pages and can follow our website, and as soon as it's out there in the world, they'll get to see the film. Or if we have any screenings coming up, they'll get the information information from our social media platforms.
Well, it's definitely worth a watch. It's a hugely interesting documentary, and I think it's a very emotional journey. Thank you very much for your time today. And Saitabao Kaiyare, If Objects Could Speak, please watch it if you can. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.